Good day, dear children. Today let's do chapter 4 of your Vistas textbook, The Enemy. The author is Pearl S. Buck, an American writer and novelist, born on 26 June 1892. She was also a teacher who has won the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1938 and Pulitzer Prize in 1932. Concurrent with her writing career, she was active in humanitarian efforts to protect Asian Americans. She died on 6th March 1973, and even today she continues to be regarded as a legendary American writer and humanitarian. The Enemy is a story set in Japan during the Second World War. An American trained Japanese surgeon is the central character or the protagonist of the story. He discovers a wounded American sailor, presumably an escaped prisoner of war, on the shores near his house. With the relations between the West and the East more turmoiled than ever due to the Second World War, the doctor, who is a Japanese, is faced with a dilemma: either to save the man and risk the well-being of his household, or turn him to the authorities as he should as a patriot. The inner conflict is the focal point of the story. This simple move, or the decision taken by the doctor, went a long way towards making his character more vibrant and leaves an impression in the reader's mind. So let's start with para 1. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. The low square stone house was set up on rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. Here you get some idea about where Sadao's house is located. You can underline those points. Low square stone house set upon rocks well above a narrow beach. As a boy, Sadao had climbed to the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan." So Sadao's father pointed at those particular islands and said, those are going to be the stepping stones for Japan. That means Japan would prosper in future. "Where shall we step from them?" Sadao had asked seriously. "Who knows?" his father had answered. "Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it." The next paragraph you get some idea regarding Sadao's father. It would be nice if you could write Sadao's father in the margin there, because once you finish the lesson it would be difficult for you to relocate the different points in the lesson because it's a little long chapter. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked or played with him, underline, that's the first point, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son, that's the second point. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern, third point, education. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. So that's the next point. He had come back at 30, and before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist. Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, He knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically, and for this possibility Sadao was being kept in Japan. So there is a very important question there. Why was Sadao kept in Japan? There are 2 points for the answer. The first one is Sadao was perfecting a discovery. The second one, he was treating the general, and the general might need an operation at any point of time, and Sadao should be available for that. Now let's continue. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadao watched mists hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the 2 children. So here you find Dr. Sadao is a bit relaxed and he is watching the scenery. At this point of time, his wife comes to him. In the next para, you find some details regarding his wife, Hannah. So you write in the margin, Hannah, H-A-N-A. But at this moment, the door opened and she looked out. A dark blue woolen haori over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance literally, at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. So you get to know that Sadao had met Hannah in America at an American professor's house, and he was very particular about the race, the purity of the race. Otherwise his father wouldn't have allowed or given consent for their marriage. Let's continue. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house. So that's the name of the professor. That night the rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble, talkative. But he had gone, and there he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have the 2 children. For they had not married heedlessly, carelessly. In America, they had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan, and when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Underline that point. Although Sadao and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand, they were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm. So you find both of them are relaxed and they are watching the scenery, and at this point of time something happens. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mists. It was a man. So that's the first point. Something black came out of the mist. He was flung up out of the ocean, flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. So the second point, he was thrown out of the ocean by a big wave. He staggered a few steps. He walked unsteadily, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head. Then the curled mists hid him again. "Who is that?" Hannah cried. She dropped Sadao's arm, and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees, crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. That's the next point. "A fisherman, perhaps," Sadao said, "washed from his boat." He ran quickly down the steps, and behind him Hannah came, her wide sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare land, lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. The surf beyond the beach was spiked means pointed, with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn, he must be badly injured. They saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. So that's the next point. The man was injured. "He is wounded," Sadao exclaimed. He made haste to the man, who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. Underline the point, appearance of the man. Sadao stopped, Hannah at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face. He was a white man. Hannah whispered. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair. Underline yellow hair. Long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. Underline unconscious. So you find a white man, that is an American, their enemy, is washed ashore, and Sadao and Hannah are trying to understand what has really happened to him. Now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his back, at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended, had not been taken care of. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. So they are trying to locate the wound. Sadao finds that there was a wound on his lower back, and it was a gun wound, and over and above, rocks also had injured him. "Oh, how he is bleeding," Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mists screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. The searchers at the beach also would have left the place because it was too late for anybody to remain there. "What shall we do with this man?" Sadao muttered, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could do to stanch the fearful bleeding, to stop the flow of blood. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, in his unconscious state, but he did not awaken. So what is Dr. Sadao doing here? He is trying to give first aid to the wounded soldier, though he is his enemy. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea. Underline the sentence. It's a very important sentence. Sadao said, answering himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be the best. Hannah said steadily, but she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said. Underline this sentence, very important. So why do you think they say that the kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea? In any case, this man is going to die. Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert, motionless figure. What is he? Hannah whispered. So they are trying to get more information about the person. Mark the next paragraph. There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He took up the battered cap, the damaged cap. Yes, there, almost gone, was a faint lettering, a sailor. He said from an American warship. He spelled it out, U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. So you get a few points about the white man. He was a sailor. He belonged to the U.S. Navy. He is a prisoner of war. He has escaped, and that is why he is wounded in the back, Sadao agreed. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, determination, come, are we able to put him back into the sea? Because she clearly knew that this man is going to bring trouble for them, since he is their enemy. If I am able to, are you? Sadao asked. No, but if you can do it alone. Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy, and he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, here you find Sadao is a real doctor. He is more concerned about this white man just because he is a patient for him now and not an enemy. You also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him to the house. So you find both husband and wife, Dr. Sadao and Hannah, have decided to take him to their house. Thus we come to the end of the part 1. Thank you, children.